Hi, welcome to This Week in Plymouth. I'm your guest host, Julie Thompson, and we're here with Derek Brindisi, who's, of course, the Plymouth Town Manager. Welcome.
Thanks, Julie. How are you?
I'm great. You had a long weekend. We all had a long weekend. It was town meeting. So let's talk about the town meeting that just happened on this Saturday. Overall, how do you think it went?
So a little town meeting recap, is that what we're going to do
Yeah,
today?
little town meeting recap.
Okay. Overall, it was very successful. It was a long town meeting. There was definitely a period of time where we all thought, I think everybody in the room, that there's no way we're going to get through these articles and we're going to have to move this to Monday night. But once we got through lunch, everybody had a burst of energy, and I think there was one motion to adjourn around 3:30ish.
Yep.
And town meeting members voted against it.
Right.
And another 90 minutes, we were able to knock it out, which honestly is, for that extra 90 minutes to have PACTV come back, OTI come back on Monday, and set this entire thing up again, I think it was well worth the extra 90 minutes.
Right. And when you think about it, an 8 or 9 hour day to get all of the business done for the town isn't unreasonable.
Great point. Right. You're 100% right. So it is a long day. Town meeting members, they put in countless hours even before the meeting begins. So
of course.
I think the more prepared everybody is going into it, the more efficient we can be.
Totally agree. So let's talk about a few of the things that did and didn't pass that were surprising. The first article that was taken out of order, and it was put to go first, was the amendment to the blight and nuisance. Can you just explain what that was and how it ended up?
Yeah, and I think we talked about the blight nuisance bylaw in one of our previous This Week in Plymouth. So it didn't pass.
Right.
This was a bylaw that would have given the administration, in particular our inspectional services staff, the ability to go after what I call problem properties, right? So those properties that are creating blights in our neighborhood and really are problematic. And and the ones that come to mind are always births down on Warren Ave.
Right.
And I think I said before, and I even said at a town meeting, that I probably get a phone call at least once a month. What's going on with births? I'm tired of looking at births.
Right.
How come you guys aren't doing anything about it? Well, this bylaw would have given us the regulations to go after the property owner to bring that building to compliance.
Right.
So there's that, and the full sale. But at the end of the day, I think that I learned a few lessons about bylaw introduction and vetting of bylaws, right? So I wasn't really that upset that it didn't pass because it was defeated overwhelmingly.
Right.
I think it was like 90% to 10%.
Right. But did the objections that people brought up surprise you?
Yeah, I was a little surprised as to, some of certainly the tone of some of the members, as if, there were some terms that this is going to become a fascist community and really just unusual language to be used at a town meeting in my mind. When again, I think we are all trying to do the best that we can and trying to make Plymouth the best community, I wouldn't say Massachusetts, but certainly in New England. So some of these regulations we bring forward to try to help us get there. But I understand where some of the concerns were. There were concerns of, we had a whole section in there that if a property is uncapped or, there's grass is overgrowth.
Right.
And the reason why that's in there is because, grass that's overgrown is a place for rodents to harbor, and possible infestation. So, this is as much a public health bylaw as it is a public safety bylaw. And so, but the counter to that is like we have a lot of rural parts of Plymouth that may have overgrown shrubbery and bushes in there because that's just the rural area.
That's right.
But and I have heard that from some town meeting members that Plymouth has rural areas. Well, we have other areas that are not rural. So downtown is very urban, right? North Plymouth is very urban, where these types of properties really create a nuisance in neighborhoods. They devalue the surrounding properties around them. So I think what we need to do moving forward is we have to come up with a mechanism where when we start to bring these bylaws forward, before they become final, that they're vetted somehow so that we can hear that feedback saying, listen, if you bring high grass in the bylaw, it's not going to work.
something you said, and I wanted to mention that to you. It was a good segue. You said, there was kind of some not great language about why you're doing this. And it's all from a lack of, I think, understanding. And I noticed, I watched the whole thing. I was here at PACTV and I watched the entire day. I was monitoring the feed, making sure that everything was great. And I noticed that there's a lot of misunderstanding about the objectives behind things. Why are you doing this? And yet I keep thinking to myself, but all that information has been out there for quite a while. If you pay attention, if you're interested in a certain area that is going to be in town meeting, you can ask, you can find out, you can attend meetings. There's so much you can do to educate yourself that would make it less confrontational. Can you speak to that, or is that just what I noticed?
Well, what you said is, what I hear from a lot of folks, that, we have 162 town meeting members, and all these articles are vetted through the select board, right? And then they're vetted through the advisory and finance committee. COPC take up some of the articles. So, that alone, there's at least 3 public conversations about these articles. And then all the precincts have their caucuses.
Right.
And, that is where I think the rub is, because, the 18 caucuses and, from the administration standpoint, we never know what they're going to discuss.
Right.
And oftentimes town meeting member chairs for the caucuses, they don't reach out and typically say, hey, Derek, we're going to discuss the nuisance bylaw. Can you or a representative come down so we can ask questions? They don't typically do that. Yeah. So oftentimes, you either just go to all of them and hopefully you're there to answer questions. But I attended a bunch of probably, I would say, 4 or 5 caucuses this past year. And I would say only 2 of them talked about the nuisance bylaw. So if that's kind of a measuring stick of everyone else, maybe 4 or 5 of them talked about that. So it's very difficult on our end to gauge what town meeting members are interested in, and we have to figure out a better way to get folks more engaged. Because I don't think it's a lack of the information being out there.
Yeah.
And I can tell you something, if someone says, well, geez, if I knew I could have contacted the town manager, I would have just sent them an email. Well, most people know how to contact me when they have a complaint. So if they have a pothole problem, they know how to get in touch with me. If they have a question about an article, please reach out, because we want to have a successful town meeting.
Absolutely.
Because we don't want to have to come back again to talk about the nuisance bylaw, because now we're being repetitive and we're wasting people's time.
Exactly. And to your point, every town meeting we learn something. So in the future, maybe we take these lessons and learn to predict what are the different things that maybe require more information, or maybe a video to go with it, or more explanation in some way, so that people feel that they're really informed when they go into town meeting floor. Because I don't think anybody intentionally shows up at town meeting and says, I don't know anything, I haven't read anything. Of course not.
Right.
They wouldn't be town meeting members.
Right.
But it's understandable that everybody hears things and learns things differently. So maybe there's just more ways to get that same information across.
Yeah, I had this, what I'm going to say in a minute, this conversation with a bunch of people leading up to town meeting. You remember during the Clinton-Trump campaign, and Donald Trump was saying things and Hillary Clinton was saying things, and as a voter, you're like, well, they're both disagreeing with each other. There's got to be some truth somewhere. And then they came out with, remember, like know your facts, or check fact check, and you could go to a website and find out what the truth is behind these statements.
Sure.
I honestly feel like with a lot of the misinformation that is spread before and during town meeting, that we have to come up with some type of fact check website where you can. These are the facts of Article 4. These are the things you need to know. Because when somebody wants to defeat an article for whatever purpose, they will make up whatever they want in order to defeat it. And so there is definitely a lot of misinformation, and people, I think, are oftentimes misled, and they're making these decisions based upon statements that aren't absolutely true. And I have to say, my job and all of our job is, my job with the select board, for example, and I've said this over and over, is to provide sound advice so that the selectmen can make informed decisions, right?
Right.
That's my job.
Yep.
And so I would say it's our collective job to provide sound advice, to give good information to our town meeting members so that they can make good, good decisions based upon sound information. And that at town meeting, I think if anything that bothers me most is that gets lost. There's a lot of misinformation that's being spread.
Okay, so we have stuff to work on.
Yes.
Okay, so let's go on to Article 4, which had capital, and one of the items was the town wharf, which was a $630,000.
It's about $630,000
dollar expense, which did not pass.
It did not pass, unfortunately.
Did that surprise you?
I think it was unfortunate that it didn't pass. Again, getting back to my previous comments of misinformation, there was a lot of discussion around the American cruise lines and that why are we going to spend $600,000 on a cruise liner to come into town? We should be spending this money on other purposes, which I would agree with. But this article was not about the cruise lines. This article was and I said this that day, was an article to expand the T-Wharf. Why now? Was because we are currently actively reconstructing the town boat ramp, which is in the zone of reconfiguration. We're adding metal piles. We are adding concrete floats, all in part of the zone of reconfiguration. So David Gould, our Director of Environmental Affairs, and Chad Hunter, our Harbor Master, said, listen, we have an opportunity to expand the T-Wharf while we're doing this current project. And if we do it now, we may be able to save money. And so what we did in advance of town meeting, what they did to their credit, they put out a bid based upon the expansion of the T-Wharf, and the bid came in saving. It was no longer a $630,000 article. It ended up being about a $500,000 article because we were going to save about $110,000 because there was a construction company that was already in the area that could have come down there and would have saved us substantial dollars. So, some folks would say, well, geez, it's just kind of odd how this is the same time the cruise lines came in September and August. Well, yeah, right. It was all ironic. I'll be honest with people, if this were to pass and if we do, which that's going to be up to the select board, execute agreement with the cruise lines, this certainly would have helped them. But if the cruise lines come here 25 times, and I think that would be on the high side, we'll just say they came 25 times, then they would use that space 25 times. And that means all of our lobstermen, our fishermen, the draggers, the recreational boaters would have the use of that expansion for 340 days a year. Like, that's a win for our local community.
So is this a good example of something that could have been presented differently or more expansively? Like, these are all the ramifications.
Well,
all the uses.
So I guess the question is, like, how do you do that? So Chad Hunt in his presentation said that.
He
talked about how this is a multi-purpose. This wasn't just about the cruise lines. But this goes back to the misinformation. There were a lot of folks that are totally against the cruise lines. They just don't want the cruise lines there. So their arguments every time they went to the podium was about the cruise lines. And so they were conflating the two issues about the expansion of the cruise lines. And I think for most of the town meeting members, they were confused. Oh, who do I believe? Do I believe the harbor master, or do I believe this man over here who's not even a town meeting member who's saying that this is about the cruise lines? And so the vote, honestly, if 8 town meeting members voted differently, it would have passed. That was how close it was.
Very close, And
I had talked to some town meeting members afterwards, and they had said to me that they were confused and they didn't know really what to believe. So they just maybe flipped a coin and said, this is how I'm going to vote. So, but that one, again, is unfortunate because we had an opportunity to save our taxpayers about $110,000 by doing the project now versus what the project would be in years to come. Okay, live and learn again. So the master plan funding, Article 8 passed the $430,000 for that, which is, I think every town is passing those at this point. It's funny you say that because I actually was reading the newspaper the other day, and there were a number of other towns that are For example, the town of Grafton, I was reading an article, they just started their community engagement piece of their master plan. So you're right, there are other communities doing the master plan right now. And that's just, I mean, again, 20 plus years since we've done the master plan. But this is what we're doing now. That's how the conversations have changed in this town since, at least in the last 2 years that I have been here. So the planning board, with Lee Hartman as our director of planning, they're going to be doing the master plan, right? Yep. But we're talking about right now doing a master plan for Forges Field, right? Yep. So let's not piecemeal it anymore. Yep. Like, let's look at a 40,000 foot level. What do we want to be in 20 years over there? Mm-hmm. We just executed an agreement with Holtec, which we should talk about today too, right? We just executed an agreement with Holtec where part of that agreement is that we're going to master plan the 1,500 acres so that when that land becomes available, we have a plan. We have a community engaged understanding of what we want to do with that 1,500 acres. And so we're talking about doing a master plan downtown. Right. Like everything we're talking about is master plan, is long-term strategic master planning. Yeah. So this is just a big win, I think, for the planning board.
And it's all connected.
Right.
All of it is connected.
Yep.
So a bunch of other things passed in Article 9. One of the big ones was $3.2 million for the Pilgrim Hall Museum, which was great.
Yeah, that again, most folks would say $3.2 million for a roof.
Yeah.
Well, think of the millions and millions and millions of dollars of history that's in that building that needs to be preserved.
Yeah.
And we all know that one thing that destroys buildings is water. So although it's a big number, I think it's long overdue and it's well worth it. And congratulations to Donna Curtin and her team.
Yeah, they've done a really good job telling their story. Most things passed. Let's face it. Now let's talk about the NIP ban, which was an amendment bylaw to ban the sale of NIPs in the town.
Very controversial. This was one bylaw that we were really trying to stay out of, and because we could see,
you mean as a town entity,
as a town, right? Yep. And the question was asked to me during it, I probably didn't have the most articulate response, but the bottom line was that, listen, from our vantage point, we could see the negative impact that empty nip bottles have on the environment. Mm-hmm. Clearly, you can see that when we have our annual cleanups, but we also can see the negative impact of a nip ban, what that will do to our local businesses. Mm-hmm. And so, and I can see the passion, especially with our businesses, because this is their livelihood. Right. And I went to some of these caucuses and local businesses were saying, listen, nips are almost 30% of my revenue. Right. So if this is how I'm paying my mortgage and paying to send my kids to college or feeding my children, like that is something that they need to consider as well. So we kind of had to extract ourselves from the conversation, let the town meeting members decide, and it narrowly passed.
Very narrowly, by 5 votes. So, and both sides really passionately presented their thoughts on it. And if you stand on either side of that fence, they're both right.
Right.
So exactly. Like you said, it's really not the town's job to weigh in, but let the people and the representatives of the people make that decision. Yeah, right. And it was the Open Space Committee that sponsored the article. They made their argument, like I made the argument why I think a nuisance bylaw is important. Open Space Committee made their argument why they think it's important, and they let the town meeting members decide. Right. So, it's interesting because when you look at the articles can be sponsored in a lot of different ways. Yeah. Oftentimes I think in Plymouth, you see departments sponsor articles, right? But you also will see sometimes boards or committees will sponsor articles. I can tell you in the last community I worked in, the vast majority of the articles were sponsored by various boards or committees, not sponsored so much by the department. So because they're in it. They're in it all the time. Right. They're always thinking about it. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. And so it's just a different dynamic here in this community, but it passed, and we'll see what the future holds with NIPS in here in town. Yeah. Now, if a vote is that close at town meeting, is there any indication that it can be brought up again, or is that would someone have to go through the process of bringing it up again, or can you not do that because that's already been voted on? Yeah. No. So any bylaw can be amended, can be rescinded, but I think in a situation like this, you wouldn't see
a department or a board or committee bring this up again.
Right.
So I think in a situation where it just passed so recently, what you would probably see is maybe like a citizen's petition, where a local citizen gathers a number of votes, and then they could sponsor their own article and present their own case. In this case, I think they would propose to withdraw the most recently approved bylaw.
Okay, and that's something that citizens always have the ability to do that, right?
Yep.
That's
citizen's
one of the
petition.
things. Okay. The citizens petition, the only other one that was a citizens petition was the zoning bylaw for solar arrays being put up, and that failed. That did not pass.
That one failed. I mean, there wasn't a lot of debate on that, and again, the citizens petitions we always stay away from. We just let the debate, and sometimes they'll ask the opinion of professional staff as to whether what they believe, what they think about citizens petitions. But this one here was. I didn't really think it was that controversial. They were really looking at kind of expand the buffer zone. But for whatever reason, town meeting didn't think it was necessary. They felt like the current solar bylaw is adequate to meet our needs.
So let's talk. The last thing we'll really go into detail with is the Holtec pilot program. So Kevin Canty made a nice presentation right towards the end about that. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. So this was, I would say, one of the biggest accomplishments, certainly at town meeting, but the work that went into it. We've been engaging Holtec for quite some time now, but the negotiations really started to ramp up. I want to say it was early August, so right before we left to go to Japan, both Selectman Canny and I. In fact, they were ramping up so much, we were 13-hour time difference away. We were calling in at 5 a.m. for a 6 p.m. executive session. So, we were still participating in those meetings even when we were in Japan. And, we went back and forth a lot, but we got to a place where I think the select board did an amazing job carving out a pilot agreement that really fits the town very well. It's an 8-year agreement. Over that 8 years, $13 million will be paid to the town in taxes. Holtec's given the town an additional $3 million in a land credit. So if a parcel of land becomes available and the town wants to buy it, we already have $3 million of a credit that we can apply towards that. And then we have first right of refusal to all the forestry land as well.
So a pilot agreement, for anyone who just doesn't know, is a payment in lieu of taxes, is for 8 years. It's $13 million. What have they been paying up until this point, till this pilot was signed? Right.
So when the last pilot ended, Holtec has only been paying their property taxes.
Okay.
And which is their right, like every other citizen. They just pay your property taxes. The reason why we really wanted to have a pilot agreement is because it takes away the debate as to the value of the property. So everybody knows who pays taxes in town that your taxes are based upon the value of your property.
Exactly.
So in this situation, because we have a decommissioning plant, the values are changing exponentially every year, lower. And so every year we have to hire a contractor to come in to do evaluation or appraisal. And so what has been happening over the last 2 years is we say, okay, the value of property is worth X. And they say, no, it's not. It's only worth Y. So we're going to pay the taxes, but then we're going to see you at the appellate tax board because we're going to challenge this. And so by having a pilot, we all know what the payment is going to be. There's no more challenges in place. In fact, we actually had a case up at the appellate tax board with Holtec that part of this agreement they're going to withdraw. So that was a win for everybody. So there's a little bit of predictability over the next 8 years. There's no conflict, during that period of time. And we were able to negotiate instead of a 120-day right of first refusal, we have a 180-day right of first refusal. And we get an additional 90 days thereafter to close the deal. So in essence, we get about 270 days if we wanted to acquire property from them. And they allowed us to get on their property every year to do an appraisal of the forestry land, because one of the biggest holdups when we're told that there's a bona fide offer is getting an appraisal company to come in quickly to do an appraisal. This is a large parcel of land. So we would think it's going to take 60 days just to do the appraisal.
Yeah.
So what the plan is, we'll always have an appraisal ready to go. So we don't have, so that'll fast track this by at least 60 days too. So,
and like you said, this will tie into your master plan, because now you have the time, you know how much money you're going to get, you know what you're going to do as far as appraising the land every single year. It just takes all the question marks out of it.
You're right. You're right. So everything you just said. So the financial aspect's done, how we acquire the property is done, and then you tie in the master plan. Now we know what we're going to do with the property. Right, you're 100% right. All the questions, all the guessing has been taken out of it. We can pull the trigger and say, this is what we want to do with this property. You guys agreed, we agreed, and let's go ahead and execute.
Right. It's not hanging over, our heads.
Scrambling.
And the last thing, there was a little bit of discussion and maybe misunderstanding about town meeting members being in person versus being remote when they attend town meeting. From PACTV's perspective, it's the people that are going to be at home have to have a Zoom login, but they also have to have a separate vVoter login, and that all goes together. They get that, and each one individually has to have their own. They can't be shared because voting, as you know, is an individual process. So both vVoter and PACTV to switch midstream is not just a click the button. It's redoing all the credentials. It's testing to make sure it works, because if you get either a vVoter credential or a clicker, we have already tested to make sure that works, because your vote matters. So for people that don't understand it, and I'm sure Steve Trifletti will come out with a document and a further detailed explanation, but it's not a decision that's ever made lightly, and it really is an option that gives people the chance to remotely participate if they need to. But remember, before all of this happened to us in the year 2020, everybody showed up at town meeting, and if you couldn't come, you couldn't come.
Right, for whatever reason.
No,
all good points, and I hope we have 162 town meeting members watching this segment of the show, because you hit the nail on the head that we can't just pivot that quickly. When you say a week ago, I'm going to be remote, and so you get all your credentials, and then you show up the day of, and like, hey, I want the clicker, and it's like, well, hold on a second, we didn't think you were going to come here, or vice versa. I think it's even worse, where it's like, hey, listen, I can't come in today because for whatever reason, and then send me credentials. You just can't pivot, and so I know the town clerk and the town moderator, he's done an amazing job trying to balance everyone's needs. So Steve Trifletti, a lot of kudos to him for what he's done. But think about, like, they created a policy for hybrid town meeting, and so we have to adhere to the policy. And I know there'll probably be some amendments, some exceptions made based upon this last week's experience, but it's a challenge.
It's a challenge, but we have to do what's best for the absolute majority of everyone. And nobody wants to not follow the rules. I mean, I don't think they do. So more to come from both Kelly, the town clerk, and from Steve, the town moderator, on that. And that has been our recap.
Great.
Well, all right. Well, thank you.
See you next time.
And we'll see you next time on This Week in Plymouth.